My name is John. That night I was working as a security guard at an old cemetery outside of town. My task was simple, to keep order and drive away teenagers who often came here in search of thrills. But that night there were no teenagers or visitors, only silence and darkness. The cemetery was old. Its history went back to the distant past. Many tombstones have long since fallen and become covered with moss. The moon shone dimly, its light barely breaking through the thick clouds. I was walking between the graves when I heard a rustling behind me. He looked around but saw nothing. Just the wind, I thought, trying to calm down. However, a few minutes later I heard the sound again. It was not just a rustle, but like steps. Slow, heavy footsteps that echoed in the darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine. He gripped the flashlight tighter and slowly turned around, trying to find the source of the sound. The light of the flashlight snatched the old crypt out of the darkness. His door was open, although I definitely remembered that it was always locked. Stepping closer, I saw footprints on the ground. They led inside the crypt. The heart beat faster, but curiosity prevailed over fear. I stepped inside. Inside it was dark and damp. The air smelled of mold. Old, moldy curtains hung on the walls. The footsteps grew louder, but I could see nothing but my own shadow dancing on the walls in the light of the flashlight. Suddenly, something stirred in the corner. I directed the light there and froze. There, in the semi-darkness, stood a figure. She looked like a human, but her eyes were empty, black abysses. I felt my heart clench with terror. The figure began to slowly move towards me, its steps echoing in the cramped space of the crypt. I don't remember how I ran out of there. My legs carried me until I found myself on a lighted street. Looking back, I saw that the crypt door was closed again, as if nothing had happened, but I knew it wasn't a figment of my imagination. After returning home, I could not sleep for a long time. That night changed me forever. Now I know that sometimes, even in cemeteries, there are things that are better not to be seen or heard. Several days passed after that terrible night in the cemetery, but I could not get out of my head what I had seen. I was haunted by nightmares, and every night I woke up in a cold sweat. I decided to go back to the crypt to understand what had happened and try to find some logical explanations. This time I took my friend Stephen with me. He was a skeptic and thought my story was fiction. We met at the gate of the cemetery late in the evening. The night was clear. The moon shone brightly, creating long shadows. "John, are you sure you want to go back there?" Stephen asked as we approached the crypt. I nodded, even though everything inside me was shaking with fear. The door of the crypt was opened again. I raised the flashlight and illuminated the entrance. The marks I saw last time were gone, but the same musty smell still came from inside. We walked inside and I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "There's nothing here," muttered Stephen, surveying the crypt. "You must have been just scared of your own shadow." But I knew what I saw. We searched the crypt but found nothing unusual. They had almost decided to leave when Stephen came across an old book. She was lying on a stone shelf, covered with dust and cobwebs. "Look, this might be interesting," he said, opening the book. The pages were moldy, but on some you could still make out the words. These were old burial records dating back several centuries. While Stephen was flipping through the book, I felt the same cold breath on my cheek that had woken me the first night. When I turned around, I saw the same figure. She was standing behind Stephen, her eyes even emptier than I remembered. I tried to warn my friend, but my voice broke. The figure reached up and touched Stephen's shoulder. He flinched and dropped the book. At the same moment, cold air filled the room, as if someone had opened the door on a frosty night. The figure began to dissolve into the darkness, leaving us horrified and confused. We ran out of the crypt without looking back. I couldn't calm down at home. The book that Stephen took with him was lying on the table. We started looking through it, looking for answers. With each page, we understood more and more that the crypt was the burial place of an old cult that practiced dark rituals. The spirit we saw was one of the victims of these rituals. We knew we had to reveal the truth, but every step we took brought us closer to greater danger. A few days passed, and Stephen and I couldn't get what we found in the book out of our heads. Nightmares haunted us at night, but we knew we couldn't stop. It was necessary to solve the secret of the old cult and find a way to appease the spirits. We decided to return to the cemetery in the afternoon. hoping that daylight would make us feel safer. This time we brought more equipment with us: cameras, recorders, and even some candles in case we needed lighting again. The door of the crypt was open again, but now it was no longer surprising. Inside, we saw the same atmosphere as at night, although the sun's rays filtered through the small windows, creating strange shadows on the walls. Stephen began setting up the equipment while I picked up the book and began to look more closely at it. On one of the pages, I found a diagram of the crypt and secret rooms we didn't know about before. According to the map, there should have been another room under the crypt. "Look," I said, showing Steve the map. "There is something under this place." We began to look for the entrance to the dungeon. We found a hatch under one of the old carpets. It was old and rusty, but we managed to open it and we went down. The underground room was even darker and more damp than the crypt. The walls were covered with old paintings depicting dark rituals. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, on which lay another book, and candles were scattered around it. "This book may give us the answers," Stephen said, picking it up. When he opened it, the room was filled with cold air again, and we heard whispers coming from the darkness. We started reading the book, trying to decipher the ancient inscriptions. It was the journal of the head of the cult, which described their rituals and sacrifices. It turned out that they were trying to contact otherworldly forces in order to gain immortality. But something went wrong, and they themselves became victims of their dark rituals. As I read, I felt the cold wind again blow against my neck. When I turned around, I saw the same empty eyes staring at me from the darkness. But this time, in addition to fear, I also felt pain. The figure reached out and touched my forehead, and I felt a chill seep into my body. I screamed, and Stephen tried to pull me out of my state. He succeeded, but I was exhausted and could barely stand. We realized that the book was the key to everything, but also the curse. "We need to find a way to appease the spirits," Stephen said as he closed the book. "Otherwise, they will never give us peace." We decided to go home and research the rituals to see how we could stop this nightmare. Time was not on our side, but we knew we had to act fast. That night, Stephen and I decided not to delay and begin our research immediately. We gathered all our notes and photos and spread them out on the table. The book we found contained not only records of rituals, but also descriptions of the dark forces the cult members were trying to summon. It also contained instructions for performing rites that could help calm troubled souls. While we were researching the book, I noticed strange things starting to happen around us. The light flickered, the air in the room became heavy and damp. I felt something invisible watching us from the darkness. "John, look at this," Stephen whispered, pointing to one of the pages of the book. It was written about a purification ritual to be performed in the very heart of the crypt, where we found the underground room. We collected the necessary things for the ritual: candles, salt, holy water, and ancient amulets, which were also found in the crypt. Knowing that it is dangerous, we still decided to try. Returning to the cemetery, we descended into the dungeons again. The darkness seemed even thicker, and the cold penetrated to the very bone. We placed candles in a circle and sprinkled salt around the altar, creating a protective barrier. Stephen began to read ancient spells from a book, while I held holy water and amulets, preparing for the worst. Suddenly, we heard the same whisper as last time. It grew louder and more terrifying until it filled the entire room. A figure with empty eyes appeared before us again. She looked even more terrible. Flaps of skin hung from her body, and black liquid dripped from her mouth. She slowly approached us, holding out her hands. "Continue reading," I shouted, as Stephen began to doubt. He spoke the incantation again, and I sprinkled the figure with holy water. From this, she howled so that her ears stopped and began to disappear. But instead of disappearing completely, it turned into a dark cloud that began to surround us. We stood in the center of the protective circle, knowing that we could not move even a step away. Whispers turned into screams echoing in our heads. Suddenly, I felt something invisible grab my arm and pull me into the darkness. "John, hold on!" Stephen shouted, trying to pull me back into the circle. We both struggled with an invisible force trying to break through our protective barrier. At that moment, I realized that it was not just a perfume. It was something much older and stronger. We needed to complete the ritual before we lost our last chance. Gathering our last strength, we finished casting the spell. The darkness around us began to dissipate, and the screams gradually died down. The figure disappeared, leaving behind only silence and cold. We stood in the dungeon, breathing heavily but alive. The ritual worked, and we were able to appease the spirits that haunted the place. Returning to the surface, we felt a huge weight lifted from our shoulders. But deep down, we knew that this victory was not given to us just like that. Now we know evil forces exist, Stephen said as we left the cemetery. But we also know how to deal with them. We left the cemetery hoping that we would never have to face anything like this again. But something told me that this story is not over yet. A few days after our last adventure, Stephen and I tried to get back to normal, but peace was just an illusion. Nightmares continued to haunt me every night, and I began to notice strange things around my house. Objects moved on their own, doors creaked, and shadows seemed to take on a life of their own. One evening, I was sitting in my office trying to distract myself from the horrors when I heard a rustling behind me. He looked around, but saw nothing. However, the feeling of presence did not leave me. I decided to call Stephen and invite him to come over so we could discuss what to do next. "John, I'm busy now, but I'll be back in an hour," he replied. While waiting for Stephen, I decided to check the books and notes we had collected. Maybe we missed some important detail. I found an old diary that was among the things from the crypt. It belonged to one of the cult members, and his notes contained even more information about the rituals. As I read the diary, the sense of presence increased. Suddenly, all the candles in the room went out at the same time, and I was in complete darkness. A soft whisper was heard, which gradually turned into shouts. They echoed from all sides. It seemed that the walls were beginning to move. I fumbled for a candle and a match, trying to light the light. The moment the candle lit up, I saw a face in front of me. It was the same hollow-eyed figure that haunted us in the crypt. She was standing next to me and looking at me. "What you need?" I shouted, only to receive another shout in response. The light went out again, and the room filled with cold. I felt something invisible grab my throat and start choking me. I tried to fight, but my strength was quickly leaving me. At the last moment, the door opened and Stephen entered with a flashlight. "John!" he shouted and rushed to me. The light of the flashlight dispelled the darkness, and I was able to breathe again. "Are you okay?" he asked as he helped me up. "Hardly," I answered, breathing hard. "We need to find out what these spirits want and how to stop them." We continued to read the journal, looking for answers. One of the records mentioned an exorcism ritual that had the power to stop the most powerful spirits. But this ritual was extremely dangerous and required a great sacrifice. "This is our only chance," Stephen said, looking over the instructions. "If we don't do this, the spirits will not give us peace." We decided to try the ritual the next night. They returned to the crypt, again prepared everything necessary, and began to follow the instructions from the diary. As we lit the candles and began chanting, the darkness around us grew denser and the whispers louder. The figure appeared again, but this time it was not alone. Other ghosts emerged from the darkness, all of them staring at us with empty eyes. We knew we had no room for error. Stephen continued to cast spells while I held the charms, trying not to pass out from fear. The spirits approached, their faces contorted in hideous grimaces. As Stephen finished the last word of the incantation, the candlelight flashed brightly, and the spirits began to disappear, dissolving into the air. The room was filled with light and silence. We stood among the remains of the candles and felt a wave of exhaustion wash over us. The ritual worked, but we knew we had paid a heavy price. "We did it," Stephen whispered, breathing hard. "Yes, but these spirits will stay with us forever," I replied, feeling the cold marks of their hands still on my neck. We left the crypt knowing that our lives would never be the same. The darkness we encountered left its mark on our souls, and we knew that this was only the beginning of our adventures in the world of dark forces and mysterious rituals. Stephen and I thought the exorcism ritual had ended our nightmare, but really, that was just the beginning. After that night, our lives changed. The spirits we tried to banish had left their mark, and the darkness we had awakened was not going to go away so easily. Every day I felt like something invisible was watching me. I started noticing things disappearing or moving on their own. Mirrors often broke when I approached them, and strange marks appeared on the walls. But the worst was at night. One night I woke up to a loud knock on the window. Looking at the clock, I saw that it was 3 o'clock in the morning. He approached the window with fear, but did not see anyone. Suddenly the room went cold, and I heard a whisper that sounded familiar to me. "John, help us!" The voice was soft but shrill. I looked around and saw a shadow coming towards me. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't listen to me. The shadow came closer and I felt cold hands grab my throat. It was the same figure we saw in the crypt. Her eyes were empty again, dripping black liquid. "You'll never be able to get rid of us," she whispered, pinning me against the wall. I tried to break free, but in vain. Suddenly the door opened and Stephen came in with a flashlight. Light scattered the darkness and the figure disappeared, leaving me on the floor, breathless and terrified. "John, we have to find a way to stop this," Stephen said as he helped me up. "They will not disappear by themselves." We decided to turn to old Professor Graves, who specialized in the occult sciences. He was one of the few who could know how to deal with such evil. The professor agreed to meet with us and help us figure out what was going on. When we arrived at his house, he was already waiting for us. His study was filled with old books and strange artifacts. The professor listened carefully to our story and began to review our records. "You have awakened a very ancient and evil power," he said, turning the pages of his journal. "These spirits will not rest until they take your soul." He told us about a ritual that could finally banish the spirits. But this ritual required a great sacrifice. One of us had to voluntarily offer his soul in exchange for the rest of the others. Stephen and I realized that this might be the only way to end the nightmare. "I'll do it," Stephen said without hesitation. "It's my fault we got into this, so I must pay the price." I tried to dissuade him, but he was determined. We prepared everything necessary for the ritual and went to the cemetery once more. The night was dark and cold. We descended into the dungeon where it all began. Professor Graves began the ritual by reading a spell from a book. The candles lit up, and spirits appeared around us again. They screamed and extended their hands to us, trying to stop the ritual. Stephen stood in the center of the circle, holding the amulet in his hands. He repeated the words of the spell along with the professor, and I watched his face express pain and fear. Suddenly, the spirits attacked us again. One of them grabbed me and began to drag me into the darkness. I tried to fight, but my strength was leaving me. I saw Stephen fall to his knees and his eyes began to darken. "No, Stephen!" I shouted, trying to reach him. But it was too late. His body fell to the ground and the spirits began to disappear, dissolving into the air. The darkness dissipated, and I was left alone in the cold room, holding the dead body of my friend in my arms. The sacrifice was made and the spirits left us forever. But the price was too high. I returned home, but the feeling of emptiness did not leave me. The darkness we had awakened had left its mark, and I knew I would never be the same again. After Stephen's death, my life changed completely. I felt guilt and sadness that did not give me peace. The nightmares still haunted me, even though the spirits were gone. It seemed to me that the shadow of what happened remained with me forever. A few months passed, and I tried to find a way to move on. But every time I closed my eyes, the image of Stephen appeared before me. I decided to return to Professor Graves, hoping to find answers to my questions and perhaps a way to calm my soul. The professor received me in his office, where everything remained as it was that day. He listened carefully to me and said, "John, sometimes sacrifice is the only way to finish what started. But your soul is still in danger. Spirits may leave the physical world, but their influence on our minds and hearts can be permanent." I asked the professor to help me find a way to remove this curse. He agreed and began searching for ancient texts and spells that might help. Eventually, we found a purification ritual that could soothe my soul and free me from the curse. We decided to conduct the ritual in the same crypt where it all began. I gathered my strength and went back there again. The night was dark and the moon was hiding behind the clouds. Professor Graves prepared everything we needed and we began the ritual. The candles were lit and the professor began to cast spells. I stood in the center of the circle holding Stephen's amulet in my hands. Whispers filled the room again, and I felt a chill that penetrated my very heart. Suddenly a figure appeared in front of me. It was Stephen, but his eyes were no longer empty. They expressed pain and sadness. I understood that his spirit had not yet found peace. "John, I did it for you," he whispered. "Don't let the darkness destroy you." The professor continued to cast spells, and I could feel the darkness beginning to dissipate. Stephen's image began to fade, but a smile appeared on his face. He found peace, and I felt a heavy weight lift off my shoulders. When the ritual was over, we left the crypt, and I felt like I could finally move on with my life. The darkness that haunted me was gone, and I knew the spirits would not return. Several years passed, and I moved to another city. My life gradually improved, and I found a way to live without fear. But I always remembered Stephen and his sacrifice. She was a reminder to me that even in the darkest times, you can find light. My story was over, but I knew I would never forget what happened. Spirits and darkness left their mark, but I learned to live with it. And now I know that true strength is the ability to find peace in your heart, even after the greatest horrors. Several years have passed, and I've already begun to forget about the horrors that we experienced with Stephen. Life gradually returned to normal. I found a new job, new friends, and even met a woman who helped me overcome the pain of loss. But sometimes, when the night got particularly dark, I still felt the presence of what we had left behind. One evening, while Sarah, my new friend, and I were having dinner at home, the doorbell rang. It was strange because we weren't expecting anyone. I went to open the door and saw an old man in a dark cloak at the door. He looked tired and scared. "Are you John?" he asked, holding an old book in his hands. "Yes, and who are you?" I answered in surprise. "My name is William. I'm a researcher of the occult, and I need to talk to you about something that happened in a cemetery a few years ago." I invited him in, and we sat down in the living room. William told me that he found old records of the cult we encountered and learned that our intervention had unexpected consequences. It turned out that the spirits we banished were just part of a much larger and more dangerous force. "I have found another ritual that can help destroy this power once and for all," he said, opening the book and pointing to the ancient records. "But for this, I need your help." I didn't want to plunge into this horror again, but I knew that if I didn't stop it now, the consequences could be catastrophic. We agreed to meet the next evening at the same cemetery where it all began. When we arrived at the cemetery, we were greeted by thick fog and an eerie silence. William prepared everything necessary for the ritual, and we began to work. Sarah stayed in the car at this time because I didn't want to put her in danger. The ritual was more complicated and dangerous than anything we had done before. We lit candles and started chanting. The air around us became heavy and cold, and we felt something invisible watching us. Suddenly, shadows began to appear from the darkness. They were bigger and scarier than the spirits we had encountered before. Their eyes were glowing red, and they were slowly approaching us. "Go on, John!" William shouted as I started to hesitate. I gathered my strength and continued to cast the spell. The darkness grew thicker around us, and I could feel the shadows trying to break through our protective barrier. Suddenly, one of the shadows grabbed William and lifted him into the air. I saw his face contort in pain as the shadow began to engulf him. I knew we had to complete the ritual, or all our efforts would be in vain. Gathering the last of my strength, I finished the spell. The candlelight flashed brightly and the shadows began to disperse. But that was not the end. I saw William fall to the ground, and an even greater darkness appeared around us. "Did you think you could beat me?" came a voice from the darkness. It was a voice that came from the very heart of night terror. I felt fear come over me, but suddenly he saw the image of Stephen in front of him. He was standing next to me, his eyes no longer empty. They glowed with determination and strength. "You're not alone, John," he said. "We can stop this together." I felt a new strength rising in my heart. Together with Stephen, we began to recite the last spell from the book. The darkness around us began to dissipate, and the voice faded into the distance. When the ritual was over, we were left standing among scattered candles and old books. The darkness disappeared, and I felt that we had finally been able to stop this evil. William was dead, but his sacrifice was not in vain. We were able to finish what we started, and I knew that now my soul could find peace. Sarah ran to me and we hugged. I felt that now we could go on with our lives without fear of the dark. We left the cemetery knowing that our struggle is over, and we can now start a new life. I focused again on the map and suddenly noticed that my flashlight was flickering, as if something was deflecting the light away from the cemetery. But he decided to go further. A faint ray of the dawn sun made its way through the thick trees. John came closer and saw an old stone archway that led to a completely different place, as if another world was hiding behind those graves. My heart beat faster, because he understood that this could be the exit from the cemetery, or the beginning of something incredible. John took a step forward and felt his body pass through an invisible barrier. The world around has changed. An amazing landscape opened before him, a magical forest with unusual flowers and trees that radiated soft light. Everything looked so unreal, as if he had entered a fairy tale world. Suddenly, a woman in a long white dress appeared from behind the trees. She smiled at him and came closer. "Greetings, John," she said in a soft voice. "You have found your way into our world. Now you are chosen to learn the secrets that lie beyond reality." John felt that a new stage of his life was opening before him, full of mysteries and adventures. He realized that this place is not just a cemetery, but a gateway to another world, where magic and reality intertwine, creating something incredible. I focused again on the map and suddenly noticed that my flashlight was flickering, as if something was deflecting the light away from the cemetery. But I decided to go further. A faint ray of the dawn sun made its way through the thick trees. I came closer and saw an old stone archway that led to a completely different place, as if another world was hiding behind those graves. My heart beat faster because I understood that this could be the exit from the cemetery or the beginning of something incredible. I took a step forward and felt my body pass through an invisible barrier. The world around has changed. An amazing landscape opened up in front of me. A magical forest with unusual flowers and trees that radiated soft light. Everything seemed so unreal, as if I had entered a fairy tale world. Suddenly, a woman in a long white dress appeared from behind the trees. She smiled at me and came closer. "Congratulations, John," she said in a soft voice. "You found your way into our world. Now you are chosen to learn the secrets that lie beyond reality." I felt that a new stage of my life was opening before me, full of mysteries and adventures. I realized that this place is not just a cemetery, but a gateway to another world, where magic and reality intertwine to create something incredible. I looked at the woman, full of peace and mystery. Her eyes shone like stars in the night sky. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to hide the excitement in my voice. "My name is Elira," she answered. "I am one of the guardians of this world. We have long been waiting for someone who can reveal its secrets and protect it from threats." "Protect?" I felt my heart beat even faster. "From what?" Elira smiled sadly. "In our world, as in any other, there are dark forces that seek to destroy harmony and steal our secrets for their own dark purposes. You will have to face them, but you will not be alone. There are others like you who also arrived here." I looked around, trying to find someone else, but the forest remained quiet and peaceful. "But how can I fight against these dark forces? I am an ordinary person." Elira bent down and put her hand on my shoulder. "In this world, you are not as ordinary as you think. Here you have the opportunity to discover new abilities within yourself and learn how to use them. I will guide you to a place where you can begin your training." I took a deep breath, feeling the light scent of flowers and the freshness of the forest. "Okay, Elira, I'm ready. Show me the way." Elira nodded and moved forward, and I followed her, feeling how each step took me further into an unknown world, where new challenges and adventures await me. We passed through a dense forest until we reached the majestic castle that towered over us. Its walls were covered with ancient writings, and the towers shone in the rays of the morning sun. "This place is called the Academy of Light," Elira explained. "Here you will meet others who have also joined our world, and together you will learn to protect it." I stepped over the threshold of the castle, feeling a sense of adventure rise within me. I was ready for everything that awaited me and knew that now my life would never be the same. Life would never be the same. Life would never be the same. Life would never be the same.